Trumpets scream somewhere inside the white void, and Ottoman soldiers stumble through knee-deep mud, firing at shadows they cannot see while horses rear and crash in terror around them. The fog eats distance and sound, turning distant screams into ghostly echoes, so that every splash, every broken reed, feels like an enemy blade about to strike from the mist. Men choke on powder smoke and freezing air, crushing one another on the invisible road as the column grinds itself deeper into the swamp, not realizing the land is closing its jaws. Only then do we pull back to the tree line, where Stephen the Great watches in silence, while the valley itself carries out the execution of an empire. The army coming for Moldavia was not a raiding party. It was the Sultan's hammer moving north. At its core marched the Janissaries, professional infantry drilled from childhood to obey the drumbeat without flinching, flanked by Sipahi cavalry, whose job was to turn broken lines into slaughter. Behind them rumbled guns and wagons in their hundreds, a moving city of black powder, fodder, and tents that let the empire bring its own world with it wherever it went. When the Ottomans chose a direction, they did not arrive as guests. They arrived as a season, and they expected the map to change for them. Facing that, on the ragged edge of Europe, stood Moldavia. Stephen the Great could muster around 40,000 men against roughly 120,000 Ottomans. But his numbers were ink on paper, not rows of identical professionals. His forces were a patchwork of boyars and their retainers, town militias, peasants dragging axes from home, hunters who knew the forest better than they knew formation drill, and a handful of mercenaries who had seen too many banners to be impressed by one more. Moldavia itself was a buffer, squeezed between Hungary, Poland, and the Ottomans. A strip of soil everyone wanted to march across, and no one wanted to bleed for. Stephen had already watched what happened when the hammer fell on open villages, when fields burned, churches were looted, and chains clinked as people were marched south as spoils. He knew exactly what an honorable pitched battle in the open would buy him: a few hours of heroic stories and a grave for his country. Against an empire that measured strength in straight lines of steel and gunpowder, matching strength with strength was not courage, it was suicide. So before the first shot of Vaslui was ever fired, Stephen made a different decision. If he could not stop the Sultan's hammer, he would make sure it swung into a shield made of mud, fog, and fear. Stephen was not born a legendary defender of Christendom. He was forged into one by losing too much. He was the kind of ruler who would kneel before icons in the morning and sign death warrants before the candles burned out, who carried both scripture and scars from earlier campaigns where help arrived late, or not at all. On the frontier, piety without steel was just another way to die, and he had buried enough men to know it. To his enemies, he was the great, but to the villages that survived, he was the man who refused to let them be taken cheaply. Some commanders worshiped banners and bloodlines. Stephen worshipped the map. He spent nights not staring at enemy standards, but tracing rivers, ridgelines, forests, and the calendar of winter with a finger, whispering the same hard truth: if I fight like them, I die like them. In his mind, there were no fair fights on the border, only smart ones and final ones. Snow, mud, distance, hunger, these were the saints he invoked when steel alone was not enough. So when the empire came, he answered, not with shining lines but with vanishing ones. We see him torching his own granaries so that Ottoman foragers find only ash, then striking their supply wagons in narrow passes before melting back into the trees. We see ambushes at river crossings, night raids that leave horses screaming and tents burning, columns marching for days through empty, poisoned land, battle after battle. Stephen's lesson is the same: weaponize everything the enemy does not count: peasants, weather, darkness, and mud, until the field itself becomes your army. And at Vaslui, he will arrange all of them into one perfect trap. The land around Vaslui was not picturesque. It was predatory. Narrow valleys pressed close like closing fingers, their slopes furred with winter forest, while rivers ran cold and slow beneath crusts of ice that broke under weight. Marshy lowlands waited in the hollows, disguised under frozen skins of mud that turned to sucking mire when trampled by thousands of feet and hooves. Above it all, in the early hours, a heavy fog slid down the river valley and refused to leave, turning distance into a white wall. Stephen walked this landscape like a surveyor and a hunter, not a king. His engineers waded into the marsh with poles to test where the ground held and where it swallowed, marking the firm banks behind the bog where his infantry could stand and fire. Scouts measured the key bridge span by span, counting how many men could cross abreast, how quickly it would choke if panic hit, while local peasants described how, at dawn, the mist clung thickest to that exact stretch of water. Every tree line, every hollow, every bend in the river was noted, not as scenery, but as a future weapon. Then he began to herd the empire. Villages were emptied and burned ahead of the Ottoman advance, leaving only smoke and trampled fields, while small Moldavian bands struck and vanished, always retreating along the same narrowing route toward Vaslui. Each skirmish, each abandoned storehouse, drew the invaders deeper into a natural funnel where a single fragile bridge, marsh on either side, and tree-lined slopes fixed their path like rails. By the time the first Ottoman boots reached the valley floor, the battlefield was already killing them. They just did not know it yet. Night sits heavy over Vaslui, the kind of cold that bites through wool and steel alike, and in the darkness the Moldavian army begins to move. Torches are hooded, boots wrapped in cloth, carts pushed by hand as men drag sharpened stakes into the marshy ground and plant them where hooves will one day thrash and break. Artillery is rolled into shallow pits behind the firmer banks, the branches piled over the guns until they look like just another tangle of winter brush. On the rise, behind the bog, infantry settle into lines on solid earth, shivering, staring into a black valley that by dawn will be full of strangers. Along the tree line, another kind of weapon is being placed. Trumpeters and hornblowers are led to pre-measured gaps between the trees, shown exactly where to stand, where to face, and when to breathe. Their positions marked not with flags, but with quiet taps on the shoulder and whispered reminders. They are told they will not sound the charge at the beginning, but at the worst moment, when the enemy is stuck, when shouting drowns orders, when men are already halfway to panic. Each of them is a match waiting for the exact gust of wind. Their notes destined to conjure an army that does not exist. Among the commanders, the air is colder than the night. They know what marches toward them, an imperial host that has swallowed kingdoms whole. And here they stand with peasants, forest hunters, and tired horses, asking them to hold against the greatest army on earth. In the low murmur of doubts, Des 10, Stephen moves like a man walking his own hall, reminding them that tomorrow it is the land that will bear the weight, not their exposed chests. Their duty is not to break the Ottomans with bare hands, but to hold long enough for the valley to do its work. As the hours bleed toward dawn, the three weapons of Vaslui settle into place. The marsh and its narrow bridge wait in silence, ready to trap and choke the Ottoman advance the moment it commits. The fog, already coiling in the riverbed. We will rise with the weak winter sun to blind friend and foe alike, hiding Moldavian movements while turning every Ottoman step into a guess. And high in the trees, the trumpets rest against numb fingers, a storm of sound poised to turn confusion into terror, until the entire battlefield feels less like a field of war and more like a sprung trap, locked and ready. At Vaslui, dawn does not rise. It creeps, a thin gray light swallowed almost at once by a wall of freezing fog that seals the valley shut. From inside that moving silence come the dull thuds of marching feet, the hollow clatter of harness, the distant roll of drums struggling to hold shape in the mist. The Ottoman vanguard feels the road more than it sees it, hands brushing the man in front, horses tossing their heads at shadows that appear and vanish a few paces away. Then, through a thinning in the white, they catch sight of it at last, a narrow bridge, a shallow river, and beyond it a ragged Moldavian force already in flight, dragging carts and banners away as if the battle is already lost. To the men in the front ranks, the Moldavians look broken, shoving one another to reach the far bank, dropping carts and standards in the slush. Scouts insist there is only a thin line of defenders beyond the river, and every officer feels the crush of the unseen thousands behind who cannot simply halt. Orders flow forward to press the attack, to drive the fugitives, to seize the bridge before the enemy can turn. And fresh units are fed onto the planks until the wood vibrates under their weight. The fog hides the rear, but its presence is felt as a constant, breathless shove from behind, forcing the vanguard off the bridge and out onto the treacherous low ground on the other side. They do not feel the change at first. Only a softening underfoot, horses taking shorter steps, a splash where there should have been a crunch of frost. And then the first man goes down to his knees in the sludge. At that exact moment, the fog ahead splits with a thunderclap as Moldavian guns roar at point-blank range, the canister and shot tearing into the front ranks, so close the gunners can hear individual screams. From the banks and the shallow rises beyond, arrows and bolts descend in sheets, and hidden, muskets, cough, flame, the sudden violence turning the bridge into a bottleneck of falling men and rearing animals. Those hit at the front have nowhere to fall but backward, into their own comrades. And very quickly the crossing becomes an artery clogged with armor, flesh, and splintered wood. Out on the low ground beyond the bridge, the Empire's pride begins to drown in mud. Heavy cavalry, bred for thunder on open plains, bogs down, one horse at a time, hooves sucked into the mire, riders yanking uselessly at reins, while arrows hiss out of the mist and find every gap in plate and mail. Infantry companies mash together as they try to spread out and deploy, only to find themselves shoulder to shoulder in a sucking swamp. Shields turned into dead weight as they slip and collide, trampling the fallen beneath them. Behind them, more men are still being pushed forward by the invisible mass of the column, and what was once an organized advance has become a blind, heaving pile of armor and terror that gives the Moldavians a single, glorious advantage. Every shot, every volley, every charge bites into an enemy too crowded to move or think, a war machine already sinking before the trumpets sound. The battle narrows down to what a man can see at arm's length, and at Vaslui, that is almost nothing. Fog presses against faces like wet linen. Powder smoke stings eyes, and every shout comes in a language someone on the line does not understand. Officers bellow orders they cannot see carried out, gesturing into a white wall where rank and file, horse and foot, friend and foe churn together in the same sucking mud. Men swing at shapes that might be enemies or comrades, slip, vanish under hooves, and the great Ottoman host shrinks in every soldier's mind to a tight circle of breath and terror. It is at this moment, when the army's vision has collapsed to a few desperate meters, that Stephen gives the signal. Along the tree-lined slopes that cradle the valley, trumpets and war horns explode into life in a single, shattering chorus, a sound far too big to belong to the battered Moldavian force they thought they were chasing. The forest itself seems to scream, notes layered with human battle cries, the echoes bouncing off trunks and fog so that no one can tell where they begin or end. To men already half-blind and knee-deep in mud, it does not sound like instruments. It sounds like an entire new army arriving at a run. Inside the mist, imagination finishes what steel began. Soldiers hear the roar from both sides and do the math. Their commanders have no time to contradict. We are flanked. We are surrounded. There must be thousands in those trees. Some swear they glimpse horsemen charging through the fog at the edges of their vision. Dark blurs that vanish when they turn to face them. But the fear remains. Units that have been pushing forward now twist sideways, trying to form new fronts against invisible enemies, jamming the bridge and the riverbank even further until columns become knots and knots become panicked, clumps of men with no clear front or rear. Stephen chooses this moment to make one thing real. From one flank, where the ground is firmest, he sends in a limited force of fresh troops, enough steel and hooves to hit hard. Not enough to overextend aimed, not at annihilation, but at confirmation of the illusion. When those Moldavian riders smash into an already turning, half-suffocated mass, the shock goes through the Ottoman line like a snapped spine, and any remaining sense of direction dies. Archers loose into the fog at sounds instead of orders. Musketeers fire at silhouettes, and men stumble into the path of their own comrades' blades, dying under banners they never even glimpsed. From above, if the fog could be peeled back, the army would look less like a formation and more like a panicked animal tearing at itself in a trap. Commanders cannot find their units. Runners vanish between clumps of fighting men, and no one can say where the Moldavians truly are, only where they might be. Trumpets in the trees keep screaming, the phantom army charging again and again with nothing but echoes, while the real Moldavian lines hold their ground and strike only where the enemy has already broken itself. By the time the horns begin to fall silent, the great host that entered the valley as a machine of war has become a blind, bleeding crowd, collapsing under the weight of its own fear long before it ever has the chance to escape. When the fog finally begins to lift, it does not reveal a battlefield so much as a shipwreck on land. The marsh is carpeted with bodies in Ottoman colors, tangled where they fell in heaps, some half submerged as if the earth itself had tried to swallow them. The bridge that once promised a way forward is now a dam of corpses and broken horses. Timbers splintered, railings torn away, men still clawing over the dead in a blind urge to escape. All around, scattered units run in jagged lines, with no formation and no clear road that does not pass through horror. Stephen does not answer this chaos with a wild chase. He answers it with a leash. Moldavian cavalry and light infantry fan out to harass the routes of retreat, cutting down stragglers, snapping at the heels of the fleeing host, but always pulling back before the pursuit can stretch into a vulnerable line. On the churned ground, they pass abandoned cannons sunk to their axles, wagons overturned and stripped, banners trampled into mud so deeply that colors and symbols are almost indistinguishable from the filth. Many of the finest soldiers in the empire lie dead, not in duels of honor, but with faces pressed into swamp water, choked, crushed, or trampled by their own comrades. What began the day as a proud engine of conquest now looks like an army drowned on dry land. And Stephen understands that pressing too far would be greed, not strategy. He has already won what matters. The valley has broken the Sultan's hammer without his men ever needing to meet it in open. Equal lines, terrain, fog, and fear did the killing. Moldavian steel only closed the accounts. As the remaining Ottomans stream away in fragments, the rout of Vaslui stands less as a victory of one army over another, and more as a warning about what happens when an empire underestimates the weight of the ground it marches on. In the months after Vaslui, the first reports that reach Ottoman command sound like lies. Courtiers and generals read of janissaries lost in a swamp, cannons abandoned in mud, a bridge clogged with their own dead, and they look for the missing page that will explain how such a thing could happen to an army like theirs. In an empire that prides itself on taking cities by steady siege and pushing borders with straight lines on maps, having a host shattered by fog, marsh, and a peasant army feels less like defeat and more like an insult. Behind the palace walls, disbelief curdles into anger, and men start sharpening excuses as quickly as they sharpen swords. Far away, in the courts of Hungary and Poland, The same news is read in a different light. For kings who have watched Ottoman banners creep steadily closer year after year, the idea that a small frontier principality has annihilated a force roughly 3 times its size is a rare, intoxicating word: hope. Envoys quietly toast Stephen in side chambers. Letters race to Rome, describing him as a shield of Christendom, and in the papal curia, the victory is spoken of with a mixture of awe and unease. Because no one likes to admit that their safety was bought by someone they had barely noticed. The border prince they once saw as a peripheral vassal suddenly sits at the center of every map that matters. Out of these rumors and dispatches, a new image of Stephen the Great takes shape. He is no longer just the stubborn lord of a muddy buffer state, but a strategist who proved that terrain, weather, and fear can cut deeper than steel, and that a valley can do what an army alone cannot. Chroniclers will write of divine favor, but beneath the pious ink lies a harder truth that every general understands. Vaslui was not a miracle. It was a design. It is the moment a border prince terrifies an empire without ever matching its numbers, by teaching the world that the land itself can be turned into a weapon. History remembers banners and kings, but again and again it is the ground beneath their feet that decides whether they endure. Forests have swallowed advancing armies whole, drawing supply lines out like thin wire until they snap. Mud has buried proud knights who trusted their horses more than the weather. Rain has turned carefully, built siege works into rotting trenches where disease finished what arrows began. Vaslui fits into that long pattern, but with a crucial difference. Here, the landscape was not just a backdrop that happened to favor one side. It was a weapon Stephen the Great deliberately loaded. He did not simply fight in nature, he turned nature into an accomplice, stacking fog to blind, swamp to pin, and fear to shatter, all into one coordinated kill box that made numbers meaningless. If you walked the valley centuries later, you would not know what it once held. The marsh grass waves softly where men once drowned standing up. The river slides under the bridge as if it never choked. And the forest watches in silence while the mist still rolls down in the early hours and settles over quiet fields. No drums, no horns, no screams, just a peaceful landscape that once broke an empire without ever drawing a sword of its own. At Vaslui, Stephen did not ask his peasants to be stronger than the Ottomans. He asked the earth to be heavier, and for one cold morning, it was.